Do you remember when racing was wild, when the smell of burning rubber, the roar of engines, and the flash of a smile could steal the show? Jungle Pam, alongside the legendary Jungle Jim, ruled the strip with a mix of raw energy and fearless charm, becoming the heartbeat of drag racing's wildest years. But behind the thunder of engines and the blinding cameras was a love story racing toward tragedy. This is the rise, the heartbreak, and the untold life of Jungle Pam, the woman who lit up drag racing's golden age and paid the price for living it too fast. The meeting that changed Pam's life. Before she became one of the most recognizable faces in drag racing, Pamela Hardy had no plans to be famous, no connection to the racing world, and no idea that a simple walk through town would change her entire life. Her story would make her a legend, an icon of the sport's wild era, admired for her confidence and charm. But what came after all the cheers was something no one saw coming. Pam crossed paths with Jim Lieberman, the man that would go on to change her life, in 1972 while she was in her early 20s, going to college and balancing classes and small-town routines. When his Corvette pulled up beside her on the street, the sound of its engine caught her attention first. But his looks, long hair, wide grin, and captivating presence kept her glued. Jim, known to racing fans as Jungle Jim, was already well known in the drag racing scene. He had a reputation for being bold, a little unpredictable, and always entertaining. He wasn't just a driver, he was a showman, someone who turned every race into a performance. And when he spoke to Pam about the life he lived, the cars, the crowds, and the constant travel, it sounded like freedom. Somewhere in that conversation, he invited her to come along, to join him on the road with his crew, and that was the beginning of their iconic partnership. For most people, it would have sounded ridiculous. Pam didn't know anything about drag racing. She wasn't a mechanic, she wasn't a racer, and she had no reason to think she belonged anywhere near that world. But there was something about Jim that made her curious. His energy was contagious, and his life sounded so different from anything she'd known. Within days, she made a choice that would surprise everyone. Pam dropped out of college to explore this fast, unpredictable life. But the world she stepped into was nothing like the calm rhythm of home. Drag racing in the early 70s was a mix of competition, chaos, and community. The tracks were packed every weekend, engines roaring, the air thick with smoke and fuel. Most of the people there were men, drivers, mechanics, and fans who lived for the next race. Pam, with her long hair, easy smile, and calm presence, didn't fit the mold, but she learned quickly that standing out wasn't always a bad thing. At first, she was just there to help, but help in Jungle Jim's world meant everything from checking the car to packing parachutes to backing him up on the line before every run. This wasn't just a side role. She became a part of the routine that made the whole operation run. Her presence on the track turned heads immediately. The long dark hair, the jeans, and the confidence in the way she carried herself make her effortlessly beautiful. But what started as curiosity quickly turned into fascination, with Pam earning a reputation as a bombshell. Magazines picked up on it fast, running photos of her beside Jungle Jim's car and dubbing her Jungle Pam. Yet even with all eyes on her, she stayed composed, moving through the chaos of race day with a mix of charm and excitement, as if she'd been part of that world her whole life. The pairing of Jim and Pam quickly became one of the most talked about sights in drag racing. Together, they brought energy to every event. Jim was the wild, unpredictable driver, and Pam was the calm, stylish, and edgy balance beside him. She'd stand behind the car, guide it into position, and do her job with the same precision as anyone else on the crew. Every time she walked onto the track, the crowd reacted. Cameras followed. It wasn't just her looks. It was the confidence behind the way she carried herself. For a sport that had always been defined by men and machines, Pam brought a bit of personality, a sense of fun, and a reminder that drag racing wasn't just about horsepower. Before long, her image began appearing in Hot Rod magazine and other racing features, often beside Jim's. But their chemistry extended far beyond the track. Jim and Pam had a connection that made everything between them feel easy. They were practically inseparable, and together they made the sport feel more alive. In just a short time, Pam had gone from being a college student in a small town to one of the most talked-about women in motorsports. But even as her fame grew and the excitement of the racing world surrounded her, the road ahead wouldn't stay smooth. Behind the bright colors and roaring engines, life with Jungle Jim came with its own challenges that would test both their partnership and their peace. The dark side of their relationship. On the surface, Jungle Jim and Jungle Pam were drag racing's golden duo, but behind the cameras and the cheers, their world wasn't always as glamorous as it looked. The same fire that made their partnership exciting was also what made it volatile. Life with Jim Lieberman was a mix of adrenaline and unpredictability, and Pam was right in the middle of it. Jim lived like every day was a race. He had charm that could fill a room and confidence that made people instantly pay attention. On the track, he was unstoppable, a showman who refused to play by the rules. The National Hot Rod Association had its guidelines and expectations, but Jim built his career on breaking them. He'd perform smoky burnouts that went on forever, pull dangerous stunts just to get a reaction, and talk to fans like they were all old friends. That's what made him beloved, yet impossible to control. His life revolved around racing. The schedule was brutal. More than 100 events a year, driving thousands of miles between tracks, living out of motels, and chasing the next thrill. There wasn't much time for rest, and even less time for balance. Pam, who once thought the road life would be exciting, soon realized it was exhausting. The long drives, the endless noise of engines, and the smell of fuel that never seemed to fade became their normal. But Jim's obsession with the sport left little room for anything else. He wasn't just passionate about drag racing, he was consumed by it. Everything revolved around performance, competition, and keeping his name at the top. Pam often found herself caught between admiration and frustration. She loved him. There was no doubt about that. But being with Jim meant learning to live inside his whirlwind. He could be funny and affectionate one moment, then distant and restless the next. The more famous they became, the more complicated things got. Their faces were everywhere, in magazines, posters, and newspaper stories. Fans idolized them, and the media couldn't get enough of their chemistry. But constant attention comes with its own kind of pressure. Pam began noticing how easily admiration could turn into jealousy, how people whispered and speculated about their relationship whenever Jim wasn't around. Behind the spotlight, their relationship had cracks that no one on the outside could see. Jim's energy, the same thing that made him a legend on the track, could also turn destructive. Pam saw both sides of him, the showman that fans adored and the man who couldn't seem to slow down. There were whispers around the racing circuit about Jim's drinking, about how he'd push himself too far just to keep up the image everyone expected. And then there were the rumors of him being unfaithful, stories that floated through the pits and bars where racers gathered after events. Whether they were all true or not, they took a toll on Pam. She'd stand by him at every race, smile for the photographers, and keep her composure even when things between them weren't right. Pam was always loyal, sometimes to a fault. She believed in Jim, in his talent, his vision, and the life they'd built together. But that kind of loyalty came with heartbreak. The relationship that had started with excitement and laughter slowly began to crack and wear her down. Still, they made it work, at least on the surface. At the track, they were a united front, the star driver and his iconic partner, still drawing crowds wherever they went. Pam would back up the car, signal him into position, and do her job like always. Fans saw the confidence, the chemistry, and the thrill. What they didn't see were the quiet arguments behind the trailer, the moments of silence after long nights, and the exhaustion that came with living life at full speed. As time went on, the pressure only grew. The sport was evolving, and so was the media around it. Fame had a way of amplifying every mistake, every rumor, every piece of gossip. Pam became a target for attention she never asked for. Reporters speculated about their relationship, painting her as everything from Jim's lucky charm to a distraction. Despite this, Pam stayed, unaware that the life they had built together was about to be shattered in a single devastating moment: the tragic accident. On September 9th, 1977, Jungle Pam's work came to a standstill. Jungle Jim was behind the wheel of his beloved Corvette, driving through West Goshen Township, Pennsylvania. He wasn't at the track. There were no cameras or cheering fans, just Jim, the open road, and the same need for speed that had defined his entire life. Witnesses later said he was moving fast, maybe too fast, when he tried to pass another car. In a split second, the Corvette crossed into the opposite lane and collided head-on with a bus. The impact was brutal, and Jim was killed instantly, just 3 days before his 32nd birthday. News of the crash spread fast. For a man who had lived life at full throttle, it felt cruelly fitting that it would also take him that way. There was no chance for goodbye, no final moment of reflection, just silence. Pam was shattered. The man who had pulled her into this wild, unpredictable world was gone in an instant. They'd shared so much: the highs of fame, the chaos of the road, and the bond that had made them one of racing's most iconic pairs. But in an instant, all of it ended. Friends said she could barely speak when she heard the news. The loss hit her harder than anyone could imagine. The racing community was stunned as well. Jungle Jim wasn't just another driver. He'd been an iconic showman, the one who made drag racing feel alive. His death left a void that couldn't be filled. Tributes poured in from across the country. Fellow racers, fans, and even rivals spoke about him with a kind of reverence. Magazines that once ran stories about his stunts and speed now carried headlines of grief. At the memorial, fans gathered in their racing jackets, some still carrying photos of Jim and Pam together. They talked about his laugh, his confidence, and how he could make anyone feel like they were part of something special. But Pam stayed quiet and didn't try to explain her pain, trying to process a loss that words couldn't touch. For the drag racing world, Jim's death marked the end of an era. The 70s had been wild, unpredictable, and full of personalities like his. But after that crash, things changed. Safety rules tightened, the showmanship faded, and the sport began to evolve. Jungle Jim became a legend, frozen in time as the rebel who refused to slow down. His name still echoed through the pits at races, a reminder of when drag racing was raw and reckless. The loss of Jim didn't just take away Pam's partner. It took away the world she had built around him. Everything that had once been loud and full of life suddenly felt hollow. But fans never forgot her. To many, Jungle Pam would always be part of the story of the most unforgettable man in drag racing history. In the aftermath of Jim's death, Pam never truly recovered from the loss. The grief changed her, and what she did next would leave fans wondering for years. Life after the track. After the crash, everything that once made sense to Pam suddenly didn't. The noise, the crowds, and the smell of burning rubber. None of it felt the same without Jim. She left drag racing quietly, with no public announcement. One day, she was there beside the car, and the next, she was gone. The emotional weight was too heavy to carry. Every racetrack, every sound of an engine starting up felt like reopening a wound that hadn't healed. Pam needed distance from the sport, from the memories, and from everything that reminded her of what she'd lost. For a while, she tried to move forward. She took on small jobs, traveled a bit, tried to find something that made sense outside of drag racing, but it wasn't easy. To the world, she would always be Jungle Pam. In fact, everywhere she went, people recognized her. Some wanted autographs. Others just wanted to talk about Jim. No matter how much time passed, she couldn't escape his shadow. Even her attempts to live a normal life felt impossible because her identity had become permanently tied to a man who was no longer there. The fame that once felt exciting now felt like a weight. Pam had never chased fame, yet she couldn't outrun it. Reporters occasionally tried to reach her for stories or retrospectives about the golden age of drag racing. And while she agreed to a few over the years, she always kept them short. She spoke kindly about Jim, the sport, and what those years meant to her. But there was always a quiet sadness underneath her words, an acceptance that the best years of her life were also the ones that hurt the most. Rumors circulated about Pam going through dark periods, Losing someone so central to her life had left her unmoored, and depression followed her for years. She wrestled with questions about who she was without Jim and without racing. For most of the 70s, she had lived life on adrenaline. Now, that rush was gone. What remained was the silence, and in that silence, she had to confront everything she had avoided during the chaos of fame. Rumors began to circulate. Some said she was struggling financially. Others claimed she had trouble maintaining relationships, and that she couldn't fully trust anyone after what she'd been through. There were whispers about her mental health, but Pam never confirmed or denied anything. She simply stayed out of the spotlight, protecting what little privacy she had left. Over the years, nostalgia for the 1970s drag racing scene grew, and with it came renewed interest in the legends who defined it. Occasionally, fans would spot Pam at car shows or reunions, smiling politely for photos. Time had softened her, but her presence still carried that same quiet magnetism she'd always had. Whenever she spoke publicly, she didn't shy away from her past. She talked about Jim with a mixture of pride and pain, remembering his wild energy, his brilliance behind the wheel, and the way he made racing feel alive. In one rare interview, when asked why she never worked with another driver, she explained that leaving drag racing wasn't about escaping grief. It was also about respect. The sport had been something she and Jim shared, something that only made sense when he was there beside her. After he was gone, it didn't feel right to keep going. In her words, it wouldn't have worked. Our relationship was a flash in the pan, a bolt of lightning. I just worked. Jungle and I had a symbiotic type of relationships, where he did those wonderful burnouts and maybe a strange style of backing up. We were just a one-off deal. But even if she had tried to make a comeback, drag racing itself wasn't the same anymore. The wild, unpredictable energy that defined the early 70s had started to fade, replaced by stricter rules and a new generation of racers. For Pam, it felt like the end of an era. It just wasn't the same without Jim. After Jim's death, Pam's relationship with fame became complicated. She appreciated the fans who remembered her fondly, but struggled with the fact that they remembered the young, smiling version of her, frozen in time, and standing beside Jungle Jim's funny car. That image became both her legacy and her burden. Still, she carried herself with grace. She'd lived through extraordinary highs and devastating lows, and was now trying to find peace in the aftermath. And as the years passed, Pam never fully escaped Jim's memory. Every attempt to move on came with comparisons, questions, and reminders of the man everyone still called Jungle. But love doesn't always end with loss, and eventually, Pam tried to open her heart again. Pam's love life after Jim. During her years with Jim, Pam met countless figures in the drag racing community. Among them was Fred Frey, a funny car owner and racer who had crossed paths with her and Jim many times on the circuit. After Jim's passing, Fred was one of the few people who truly understood what she was going through and the pressure that came with being part of that world. Their connection grew slowly, born out of shared memories and mutual respect. Pam and Fred eventually married, and for a brief period, it looked as if she had found some sense of normalcy. But normal was never easy for her. The relationship carried the weight of everything that had come before. People still called her Jungle Pam. Every conversation about the past circled back to Jim, and every public appearance brought the same questions. It was almost impossible for Pam to escape the comparisons. Fred was patient, but the strain was constant. He lived in the same racing world that had shaped her, and that meant living with the shadow of Jim Liberman every day. What began as comfort eventually became a reminder of what Pam had lost. The marriage was full of good intentions, but heavy emotions. It wasn't just the fans or the media, it was the quiet moments too, when Pam would catch herself thinking about how different things had once been. The marriage didn't last. The emotional weight of her past, combined with the pressure of being watched and speculated about, eventually wore them down. When they parted ways, Pam retreated again, choosing privacy over publicity. There were no scandals or bitter headlines, but it was clear that the marriage had a huge emotional impact on Pam. Years later, Pam met Bill Hodgson, the man who would become her second husband. Unlike Fred, Bill wasn't part of the racing spotlight. Their relationship developed quietly, away from the cameras and curiosity that had surrounded her for so long. Bill understood that Pam wasn't looking for fame or attention. She wanted peace, and with him, she found it. By the time Pam and Bill's paths crossed, she had already been through the full cycle of fame, the excitement, the heartbreak, the disappearance, and the reluctant nostalgia. With Bill, there was no pressure to perform, or to live up to the image of Jungle Pam. He knew her simply as Pam Hardy, a woman who had lived an extraordinary life but wanted ordinary days. They built a calm, steady life together, far removed from the roar of engines and flashing cameras. Over time, Pam began to heal, though the scars of her past never disappeared. She often reflected on how love had shaped her, first through the thrill and tragedy of Jim, then through the quiet understanding of Bill. In rare moments when she spoke about her past, she admitted that the connection she had with Jungle Jim could never be repeated, acknowledging that what they had was one of those once-in-a-lifetime bonds that leaves its mark forever. Even with new beginnings, the public has never stopped wondering about her love life. Fans still asked where she was, whether she had remarried, and if she ever truly got over Jim. The fascination followed her for decades, proving that for many, Pam wasn't just a figure from racing history. She was part of a story that people couldn't let go of. Thankfully, Pam has handled this curiosity with grace. She doesn't entertain gossip or feed speculation, and she rarely speaks about her private life. Her relationship with Bill remained largely out of the public eye, and that privacy has become her peace. But after all these years, fans are still wondering, what has Jungle Pam been up to? Where is she now? And how has life treated her after everything she's been through? Where is Jungle Pam now? Pam Hardy is 71 and living a quiet and grounded life far away from the chaos that once defined her. She's settled down with her husband, Bill Hodgson, a man who isn't part of the racing world but understands the importance of peace and privacy. Together, they've built a simple life that gives Pam the space she never had when she was constantly in motion. Pam never had any children, and she's never really talked about wanting any. Her life seemed to stay focused on memories, friendships, and the legacy she built on the track. Thankfully, there's never been any report of Pam dealing with major health problems. She's said to be doing well for her age, staying active and in good spirits, still carrying the same energy fans remember from her racing days. Every so often, she steps back into the spotlight, usually for drag racing retrospectives, interviews, or fan conventions. When she appears, she's greeted with warmth and nostalgia. People still remember the woman who stood beside Jungle Jim with a mix of confidence and grace. Those memories never faded. Fans line up to meet her, some clutching old photos or magazine covers, others just wanting to say thank you. In 2016, Pam briefly returned to the drag racing scene, stepping back into her old rhythm at the National Hot Rod Association Finals in Pomona, California. She guided past champion Jack Beckman into his tracks after each burnout, a nostalgic nod to her iconic days, alongside Jungle Jim on the starting line. Speaking about the experience in an interview, she said, "It was a little bit surreal. I was surprised that I pulled it off, actually. Backing up a car today is more intense. It's much more intense. It's the same, but it's different. It's not as laid back as it used to be. Jack is very kind, and he backs up slowly for me." Preserving the legacy of her drag racing era is something Pam has accepted quietly, if reluctantly. Memorabilia collectors, museum curators, and historians frequently reach out about photo archives, race programs, or props connected to Jungle Jim and the team. She has donated a few items over the years, including jerseys, a few well-worn personal effects, and photographs, when she felt the request honored the history without exploiting it. Inside the racing community, she's treated with a kind of reverence reserved for figures who helped define an era. People still tell stories about the way she worked the pit, how she packed a parachute, and how she handled the chaos with a calm that felt effortless. Pam keeps a minimal public footprint online. There's no active social media persona, no polished feeds or behind-the-scenes content. Instead, her presence is mostly archival photos scanned from 1970s magazine pages, fan-run websites, and forum threads where enthusiasts trade clippings and reminiscences. Journalists and podcasters still reach out for perspective, and on rare occasions, she'll allow a candid interview that focuses on facts rather than speculation. When she speaks, it's straightforward. A few brief recollections about race weekends, the people she worked with, and the practicalities of being on a crew. She avoids gossip and refuses to feed tabloids, which keeps the narrative about her life anchored in the sport's history rather than the noise that once surrounded it. Culturally, Pam is still one of the most recognizable faces from 1970s drag racing. Whenever people talk about that wild era, when racing was as much about showmanship as speed, her name always comes up. You'll see her photo in magazines, documentaries, and even at classic car shows, reminding everyone of a time when personality ruled the track. She never drove, but she brought something new to a sport that was almost entirely run by men. She showed that you didn't have to be behind the wheel to make an impact, and when she does talk about those days, she doesn't sound bitter or nostalgic. She's thankful that people still remember, still care, and still smile when they hear the name Jungle Pam. Were Jungle Jim and Jungle Pam your favorite icons from drag racing's golden age? Drop your answers in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for